This is your home for St. Cloud State hockey, keeping you up to date on the NCHC.
One-timer coming, they score! Ripped in! A bomb from Pervix!
Women's WCHA.
So Dana Rasmussen fires and she scores! Dana Rasmussen for the Huskies alongside
The National Hockey League.
Dwayne Kaprizov in for a chance to win it! He scores! Kirill, the thrill is for real! Welcome to the NHL, a game winner!
And everything from the state of hockey.
St. Cloud Cathedral is now 42.6 seconds away from wrapping up the school's first ever title.
Welcome to the Huskies Warming House Podcast Den. Welcome into episode number 122 here on the Huskies Warming House podcast. The first week of August, the first couple of days, myself, Noah Grant, alongside Nick Maxon as always. And Nick, a brainchild of yours once again comes to fruition. And normally people would shudder at that type of comment, but I think today's show might enlighten people for a little bit more fun. Some NCHC previews going on. First, we're going to start in reverse order of what we anticipate next year's finishing order is going to be at the end of the NCHC regular season. Subject to change, quite obviously. I think even when we start with the team that we're starting with today, there are some changes that, still might bode some promise with a very young group over in the state of Ohio. Other than that, a couple of other signings in the early portions of the show, as always. And then our extra ice session. I think we've asked this question a lot, but what is honestly going on with the Chicago Blackhawks? Even Jonathan Taves has no idea. So we're going to dissect everything related to that club and beyond. Without further ado, we'll start, as always, with Center Ice View News and Notes and the Huskies Illustrated Weekly Roundup. Center Ice View News and Notes. Center Ice View provides you with the best coverage of St. Cloud State Huskies hockey, from game notes, recaps, photos, and more. Go to centericeview.com.
Illustrated Weekly Roundup, Noah, Center Ice View News and Notes. And I think one of the free agents that was with the NHL probably didn't even file arbitration, but apparently they're going to be walking away from the table. We're talking about Adidas. Yes. So the NHL's official uniform sponsor essentially is not going to renew its contract. Now, mind you, the current agreement does go into 23-24. Numbers are not my thing on Monday.
So 2 years for those who are curious.
Yes. So maybe that's where that was coming from. 2 years left on their current deal. I think they took over 2016, 2014?
2017-18 was their first season. The parent company that ended up buying out Reebok. So like a lot of people have said, kind of jumping in here, I guess, a lot of people have said that, Adidas hasn't been around that long. Well, really, it's technically Reebok 2.0, which has been around since 2006. So it's interesting.
It's interesting. And you kind of wonder, does that open the door for maybe a bigger brand such as Nike to get back into the game? Heard some rumblings about that. I'm not sure if that holds really any weight currently. But how big for the NHL if Nike were to step up and to become a uniform sponsor? I mean, that would be huge for the game in multiple different levels. So we'll have to keep our eyes on who takes over that contract. I thought Adidas had done a nice bit of refresh from Reebok. Now, mind you, not a ton of changes, but I think what they did has been good. The reverse retros were a nice money grab for them. Supposedly, maybe that's happening again this year, but we'll keep you guys posted on those. Here's
it's weird, though. I just wanted to jump in and say it's weird. A lot of people don't like the shoulders on the new Adidas jerseys. The kind of I don't know what you would call it, like the little like an foam sponge type thing. I had no issue with it. I think the NHL's biggest challenge, and this has been hockey's issue for a long time, especially as you can note it back to the transition between wood sticks versus split two-piece sticks and then true composite sticks as we moved on through, as we saw a lot of changes in branding. Easton used to be a big brand. CCM used to be a bigger brand than what they are. Yep, Reebok was in there as well.
His shin
And of
was
course,
huge.
yeah, and of course Bauer. And I think really the only company that has stood the test of time in terms of being the empire that it was, so to speak, is probably Bauer. I think all the rest of these teams really have kind of had some ebbs and flows, and Bauer certainly has had his own troubles too, obviously. But you kind of wonder who's going to be the New Jersey supplier. There's not a hockey group in mind that sticks out. I mean, CCM, Reebok, they've all made jerseys. Bauer really not so much, but there isn't somebody that stands out in my mind. I think Nike or Under Armour obviously are bigger name clothing brands that stand out to a lot of people, but beyond that, I don't really know.
We'll have to keep our eyes on it, right? See how that goes. Again, could be a really good thing, depending on what changes the new supplier may have. Speaking of big changes, how about this one? Kind of confusing a little bit. And what I mean by that is, it could signal either really good, depending on how you look at it. The Anaheim Ducks are the suitors that get John Klingberg on a one-year kind of prove-it contract, $7 million. Now, mind you, 6 goals, 41 assists, 74 games played last season for the Dallas Stars. Again, kind of a goofy situation, to say it lightly. Apparently came out before the trade deadline. Like, he had requested a trade from Dallas, never made a move on him. Supposedly they were in contract talks. That didn't go anywhere. So now Anaheim swoops in and gets John Klingberg, who good puck moving defenseman, good skater, maybe a little bit less on the defensive side, but certainly a good driver of possession, you could say, as far as the back end is concerned. And for Anaheim, on a one-year deal, this is a very low risk, potentially high reward type scenario where, depending on how Anaheim does, now mind you, they started off kind of hot last year before they fell back to earth. You kind of wonder if they make any more moves, and with Pat Verbeek at the helm, even if it's not this year, do they improve enough, or maybe John Klingberg signs a longer term deal with them, or at worst, if Anaheim stumbles, that's a tradable contract for a one-year rental. So a lot of good things on this signing, actually, for Anaheim, whether they keep him or not.
Yeah, 29 years of age, and as a lot of outlets have pointed out, very Taylor Hall-esque, pretty much identical to the contract he signed a couple of years ago. Low risk, high reward, obviously, and it's not that much. That's not usual that you say that for a $7 million average annual value of a contract being that way. But it's funny because the whole thing stemmed from him just feeling like he was not being valued by the Stars as to what he thought he was worth. Well, it's funny how things kind of progress. We'll talk about this a little bit in the extra ice session, but it sounds like if Patrick Kane was ever moved, it sounds like right now the Dallas Stars are the front runner for picking him up with that cap space. So give a little, take a little. I don't know. We'll have to see, but good for John Klingberg and the Anaheim Ducks. Certainly a good infusion. They really, they've had a couple of guys that have kind of fit that mold, but really your Cam Fowlers, Kevin Shattenkirk's, but really other than that, there really hasn't been a primo defenseman since maybe Scott Niedermayer.
Right. They may have one future-wise with Jamie Drysdale, but he's still very, very young and still developing.
Josh Manson was okay, I think, but he's a big name for him if he continues to produce the way he does. So,
100%. A couple other signings. Matthew Joseph signing with the Ottawa Senators, 4 years, just a shade under $3 million annual value. Again, former Tampa Bay product, 25 years of age, 12 points in 11 games after he was traded for Nick Paul in March. So he re-signs that. Rangers adding also 21-year-old Capo Caco for 2 years. So he gets an extension, $2.1 million, kind of a bridge deal there for the former second overall pick. And Anaheim also re-upping RFA for Isaac Ludestrom for a term of $1.8 million per season. Also for 2 years, I should add. And then some one-year contracts. How about this one? Jesse Puljujärvi. There is not a more interesting contract versus team than Jesse Puljujärvi, who was drafted by Edmonton, goes back home, comes back, was very adamant he didn't want to resign, and then signs a one-year pity contract. Okay, I'm confused. But $3 million after scoring 36 points last year. Ethan Bear for the Hurricanes, $2.2 million after 14 points and just under 60 games. Former Wild forward Ryan Donato re-upping with the Kraken for $1.2 million. Pittsburgh adding Danton Heinen back in a $1 million deal. Now, mind you, he was an RFA. They let him go to UFA. They were able to get him back. Now, if I recall correctly, the qualifying offer for him was closer to the $3-4 million mark. So Pittsburgh rolling the dice, they're able to retain him for a more team-friendly number. And then Detroit adding defenseman Robert Hagg, $800,000 after last season split with both the Buffalo Sabres and the Florida Panthers.
Yeah, one more on this list too. Jonas Siegenthaler, 5-year deal for him, by the way, $17 million total for him, just over $3.25 per season, 14 points in 70 games, a 25-year-old defenseman for the Devils as well. So, a couple of guys getting their paydays. I always like Jonas Siegenthaler's game. Very little known, I think, playing with a poor New Jersey Devils squad over the past couple of seasons. 2 more topics here to kind of roll through. In retirement news, California, it seems like it must be nice. Yeah, we'll have to see moving forward for a variety of reasons. Number one being that the San Jose Sharks will retire forward Patrick Marleau's number 12 on February 25th. He'll be the first player in franchise history, which sounds kind of weird when you think about it, but then it doesn't sound that kind of weird when you think about it, right? All-time leader in goals and points, and is the NHL's all-time games played leader with 1,179 games, 566 goals, 631 apples over the course of 23 seasons. 21 of those were with the San Jose Sharks. So that one in this list, very well deserved. Hell of a career for him. I think there's no secret that he definitely deserves a jersey in the Raptors. The other one, Los Angeles will retire Dustin Brown's number 23. And I don't know if it's so much the number retiring. I think it's the second part, unveiling a statue as well on February 11th for him, the 7th player to have his number retired for the team. Roger Vachon, Marcel Dion, Dave Taylor, Wayne Gretzky, Luc Robitaille, and Rob Blake are the others. And it's not that surprising. He's a player. I mean, all of his 18 seasons were with the LA Kings, 2 Stanley Cups, franchise's leader in games played, but he's only 6th in goals, 8th in assists, and 7th in points. Now, granted, 712 points in just under 1,300 games is still a heck of a feat in today's NHL, and I'm not taking anything away from that. I just don't know that Dustin Brown, especially towards the middle of his career where he kind of struggled, he just never seemed like he was that guy that was the extra gear necessary to have a number retired and a statue unveiled. It kind of goes back to the same conversation that we had about Mikko Koivu in Minnesota, where he was a hell of a hockey player, but he was just on that silver lining where it's like you can make the argument for and you can make the argument against. So,
well, a quick comment on that too, Noah. And I think we talked about this during the Mikko Koivu retirement ceremony as well. As there's 2 parts to this equation, right? There's what a lot of people focus on, which is the on-ice success. Again, Dustin Brown, like Mikko Koivu, a lot of the team accolades, a lot of where his respect has been earned has been actually off the ice. Again, team captain for a number of years. They credit him and his leadership for LA winning those 2 cups in just under 3 seasons, really kind of being the voice and, I guess, leading the charge. So, and again, when you go back to that list, Marcel Dion, Wayne Gretzky, just to name a couple, you talk about, what was it, 8th in goals or 6th in goals?
6th, yeah.
6th. The players' names that you mentioned before, I believe there's probably a bunch of those that are above him. So you talk about recent players that have had the impact on that franchise. I get it. Now, from a hockey purist sense, the numbers may not be super exciting. But again, I think LA really does credit that time of their franchise. A lot of what Dustin Brown was able to carry, both more than maybe off the ice. Certainly, he was an impact player, maybe not necessarily in the score sheet. I believe that's where you're seeing the statue, and no question the number gets retired. But I believe that statue has more to do with his voice more than it does maybe with his skill set.
Yeah, I think it's kind of interesting because I think obviously, and everybody has their ups and downs. You have your Drew Dowdys, your Andrei Kopitars too, that were part of that group as well too. Jonathan Quick, right. So it's kind of like, where do you draw the line, I guess, so to speak? I see all of those guys as a collective group, so to speak. So it's kind of like, do you see them all together, or is Dustin Brown, one step ahead of the rest of those guys? I don't know that you can make that argument, but nonetheless, he had a hell of a career, and I'm not going to take anything away from the guy, obviously. Just, food for thought. And I've seen comments on both sides of that waiver wire, but for sure, Yeah, more games in the show than I'll ever play. So let's just put it that way.
Right.
In keeping in light with recent weeks, our final topic, the CEO of Hockey Canada will not step down, but another Canadian was actually exonerated this past week, Nick, a story that we covered a fair amount of time ago. And it's always, in some senses, nice to see these stories, obviously the difficult conversations, but interesting news here. A jury on Tuesday found former Vancouver Canucks forward Jake Virtanen not guilty of sexual assault after a week of salacious testimony for him. This was an incident that was stemming back from September 2017. The Canucks essentially placed him on leave after 100 total games in the National Hockey League, or points, I should say. He was 25 years of age at this current point. He wept openly. He cried when the verdict was read in the Supreme Court of British Columbia. So a very interesting thing. He was charged in January with sexual assault in connection with an incident in a downtown Vancouver hotel with a woman back in 2017. She said the sexual encounter was non-consensual. He said it was. And the Crown and Defense Counsel finished their closing arguments Monday by focusing on the reliability of the trial's only two witnesses and their conflicting testimonies. So interesting little story. 16 points in 36 KHL games last season. He was over in Russia. So kind of a happy story in a sense. It's one of those that, you don't really know how to feel at the end of it, even that he's been exonerated, but you kind of wish him the best and you hope that he moves forward somehow.
There are no happy endings with these.
Yeah.
And I think when we talk about these outcomes, I think that's probably the best way to phrase it, Noah.
Yeah.
When you're being found not guilty, there's two ways you can look at it. And I think the masses love to view it as this never happened, when that's probably far from the truth. It doesn't mean something didn't happen. In fact, a lot of the time, sometimes the prosecution just can't prove it.
Yeah.
And when you have in this specific case, you have conflicting testimony, especially in a case like this, it's sexual assault / sexual harassment, where a lot of it is relied on testimony. If you have conflicting stories, that's powerful. That's powerful, especially for Jake Virtanen side of it. But you mentioned him crying about it, right? So what's good and bad about this situation is what's good is, does that mean Jake Virtanen maybe gets another shot at the NHL? Maybe. We don't know. Does that mean that the alleged victim, I think it's still appropriate to call it the victim in this case, regardless of the outcome, right? Is there anything good here, right? Allegedly, right? We just don't know. The one thing that I think is good that we can say is, at least from a perspective of the public view on this usually marks the end of that, which means what we all hope for in these situations, that everybody involved can at least start the process of putting this behind them, looking forward. And again, you just hope that the folks that are involved, whatever help they need, whether it's mental health, whatnot, those services are available, and however that needs to be dealt with moving forward, they have the right and the access to those services. Because again, these are very difficult things to talk about. Again, there's really not a clear-cut answer here, Noah.
Yeah.
And I think we need to explain to the viewers that we don't really hold a view one way or the other, because we're not in their shoes. We're not Jake Virtanen. We're not the alleged victim in this case, or the two witnesses that were there having to relive this. You just hope, again, that this starts to put the closure on the situation of these events, and that everybody can move forward and be able to have just another day looking forward, I guess.
Yeah, you can take solace in the fact that due process was had according to the legal system, and that the result was what it was. And now you hope that people can move on and do other things with their lives, quite obviously. So with that being said, we're going to do some other things too. We're going to get started with the first of 8 NCHC previews here in the main show. And welcome into episode number 122 here on the Huskies Warming House podcast. Nick Maxon joining myself, Noah Grant, for another episode, another rendition, and a rip-roaring good time, talking some college hockey for the first time in a long time here. So kind of good to get back in the swing of things. The NCHC, of course, is awaiting us at the start of October. And kind of the way that some of these NCHC previews are going to work, I think, to break it down for the folks and kind of give them a general idea of what they're going to be able to be expecting here. Like we mentioned, 8 teams, because I know this might be shocking, but there are 8 teams in the NCHC. So
no way.
Yeah, crazy, right? So we're going to do them in reverse order from what we think the reverse order of the standings is going to be. And we're going to kind of go through a general theme of sorts. And apologies to everyone who was on the Twitter sphere. I didn't mean to post the opening for the questions for the Miami Redhawks until earlier this afternoon. We're recording, of course, on Monday night because it's been a hectic week. So hopefully I'll be on top of that a little bit more. So apologies for that. We only have one listener question, but we'll try to grow that as we go forward as well. But general outline, we're going to talk about just a general overview of the team that we're talking about, followed by some team stats, player stats, the incoming freshman transfers, and some departures that went on over this past offseason. Weird to say that in college hockey, but of course, COVID rules still carrying over into the subsequent seasons with the transfer portal. And then we'll preview this season as well, what we think about those incoming freshmen, as well as the players they've got on their roster, and then take a look at their schedule and finish with some listener questions as well. So without further ado here, Nick, did you have anything else to add? First of all, I might as well ask.
Yeah, the preview is solid, so let's get into it.
Yeah, let's get into it. Number 8, we do have the Miami Redhawks. Last season, coached by Chris Bergeron, who this upcoming year will be in his 4th season, along with both his assistant coaches in Barry Shute and Eric Rude. Of course, Eric Rude, former St. Cloud State women's hockey head coach here in the Granite City. Their home rink, the Goggin Ice Center, otherwise known as the Steve Cady Rink in Oxford, Ohio, seats 3,642 at the time of recording, and they do not have a goaltender or volunteer coach at this time. So, Nick, they're a team that has first of all, before we jump into it, I think it's always fun to talk about college hockey rinks. This rink is a bit of a newer rink. And I think for the knock on where Miami is maybe standings wise, or has been in the past couple of years for the NCHC, they still get pretty good attendance, and it's a pretty rocking building.
It is, and it's one of those, sort of good college hockey stories, because oftentimes you have almost the opposite, where you have a really good team and they just don't draw. Go first. Sorry. So had to throw a jab out there. Whoa. But then you have a team that's been, record-wise, I think it's fair to say it hasn't been great. And they have still been able to draw decent crowds. And I think for Miami, I think this is definitely a show me year. And I think it's a show me year for Bergeron and the coaching staff. Because again, at year 3, year 4, you expect some sort of change, or you expect some sort of results that you promise when you get hired for the job. Granted, in college hockey, it's a lot of transition. Again, with the COVID transfer rules, you wonder how some of that has played into some of the way that they have had to construct their roster, retain their roster, recruiting, grad transfers, so on and such forth. But at the end of it, I still think, regardless of all of that, just based on their recent history, this, no question, needs to see improvement, or else there may be some other changes coming for Miami, unfortunately.
Yeah, certainly going to talk about the stamp on the team, as of course the incoming freshman groups are the process of years and years of recruiting to get them to this point. So we'll have to see if they can make their stamp. Last season, 36 games for the club, 24 conference games, 10 non-conference, 2 conference playoff games for them that ended in an exit in the NCHC quarterfinals, and thus the end of their season. 8th out of 8 teams in the NCHC, finishing with 17 overall points, and they were 45th out of 59 in the pairwise, winning just over 28% of the comparisons. Conference record was a 4-19-1, just over essentially a 188 winning percentage, and a 7-27-2 overall record, just over a 220 winning percentage for them. 4-11-1 on the road, 3-16-1. 4-11-1 at home and 3-16-1 on the road. They were 0-5-2 in overtime as well. They did not. They did not get a victory in overtime, although they did get a victory in one of their shootouts in the 2 that they were in. So we'll talk about that as well. Their wins, their 7 wins, 3 of them, actually, I didn't know this until I looked back, came against Omaha. So
that's right.
they really had the Mavs number. One against Duluth. Actually, technically two. One regulation win against Duluth. The second was a shootout win for them. They also tied Bowling Green, was the other tie that they had along with the Bulldogs. Ferris State, Long Island, and Mercyhurst marked the other wins. The most losses that they had coming against any one team the past season. Denver 6 times, and Western Michigan, Colorado College each swept both of the series that they had, so all 4 games, and St. Cloud and North Dakota only having 2 games apiece with the squad and winning all of those games as well too. So Nick, is there any surprise there before we get into the real deep team stats statistic wise, as you look at their overall record and the teams that they've won against, the teams that they've lost against, was there any surprises that kind of popped out? Anything that you noticed as the season kind of went along?
I think, if anything, what surprised me was they hung tight with some of the more, shall we say, physical clubs. Duluth was a team that, and this is a little bit on both sides, right? Miami trying to grit it out. Duluth, again, was a very up and down team this last year, but we'll talk about them more in detail later on in the weeks as we go through the previews. But I kind of feel like, too, some of that record numbers, and let's just be straight, they're not great.
Yeah.
But there were a lot of games that they kind of held into until about the third period, and then things just sort of broke away. I think the biggest thing for Miami was they just didn't score. So they were, I think, conference worst in terms of scoring.
Very much so.
Very much so. Also, defense was not great at all either. So the goal differential was, I believe it was minus over 100, if I remember the statistics correct.
So scoring differential, since we're jumping into it, they were minus 1.64 goals per game compared to their opponents, which their goals per game actually wasn't terrible. It was 2.6, but they gave up 4.25 to their opponents. Scoring by period, like you mentioned, third period was the worst for them, but overall they were minus 59 in the goal category, but they were minus 491 in the shot total. So they were not drivers of possession at any point, and like a per game total was just under 14 shots less per game, which, as you and I know, especially in the college hockey world, Nick, minus 14 shots per game is almost essentially a period's worth of shots that you're giving up extra to the team that you're playing.
Right. And when Miami was in St. Cloud, it was, shall I say this, it was ugly. To say it was an NCHC record for goals scored. I believe it was 19 goals, or was it over 20? I think it was 19 in 2 games. And it's one of those.
I think it was 18. I think it was
18 or 19.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's just say this. I'm not trying to drudge on Miami at all, but because the one thing they did do is they came out the next night. They still gave an effort, but you could see that. There's some structural things that are very, shall we say, dirty. They're not clean. You can see the lack of offense is triggering some of the things that they're trying to do. A lot of trapping, especially in the neutral zone. So it's not a surprise, going back to your original point, Noah, with some of the things that happened. Yeah. But I think the other thing too, and I've mentioned this in other years past, is the message from Chris Bergeron too. And I'm not trying to go down on this coach, because I've talked to him a couple. He seems like a good dude.
Yeah.
But you do wonder with coaching strategies, right, or the way you approach coaching, what that message is and how long is that shelf life, right? Essentially the NCHC media day, which happens in September here in St. Paul, and he talked about how the effort level needs to be there. And I get it. When you don't have maybe per se the skill, you have to at least give an effort. And as we heard time and time again, and what Miami wasn't in St. Cloud until February. So from September to February, the message didn't really change. And you kind of wonder too that, do the players know this, and is there a weight on them as well? Because you got to know that by that point, the record is what it is. Where your deficiency are at, and you still want them to try, but at some point, does the message need to change too? And you kind of wonder, has that affected recruiting? Has it affected retention? Again, they're to your captain, Derek Daschke, off and running to Duluth. So there's some questions there. And no surprise of how a lot of things did pan out this year.
Yeah, certainly we'll get into a couple of their losses this season, obviously, as far as personnel is concerned. But there are some underlying numbers, and you wonder that if it's more a process of, with teams like this and knowing that, because you look at the Redhawks and you think, if they were in the CCHA or if they were in some of these other conferences, they'd be top tier. They'd be, top 1, 2, or 3 in some of these conferences with the personnel that they have. The NCHC is arguably the most competitive conference in college hockey, and they might be an upper echelon team. Like, for example, let's throw out the easy one here. If you put Miami if you put them over in Atlantic hockey, they'd run away with that conference potentially. Like, they're a good hockey team. It's just they're stuck in a conference that unfortunately has even better teams with them. And a good example of that last season, they only outshot their opponents in 6 total games this season, and they lost 4 of them. When they were outshot by their opponents, somehow they found a way to win 5 of those hockey games and tie 2 others. But yeah, as far as the 1-goal games, when you talked about hanging around 2-8 in 1-goal games, so not able to get over the hump with those either. When they were leading or after 1 or after 2 periods, they were 5-7-1. So they didn't even have a winning percentage when they were leading after 1 period and after 2 periods. So, and when they were trailing after period number 1, they only had 1 victory and 1 tie. And after 2, they had 16 losses and nada besides that. So, and when they were tied after 1, they were 1-5 on the season. So you talk about, how the game just slowly kind of got away from them. However, Nick, 3 more stats to go here. And they're
only
actually
3.
Yeah. And yeah, actually I cut it down this year for our listeners. But these ones are actually pretty decent. They took essentially 1 penalty less per game than the other team that they were playing. They were not a highly penalized team by any means. And their power play percentage was 20.4%. They were 29 for 142. Actually, a pretty good power play percentage when they did get on the man advantage. Unfortunately, penalty kill wise, to round it out, just under 75%. They allowed 40 power play goals in the season. So, definitely a big challenge, Nick. And we know with the NCHC, and obviously that power play total was probably ruined a little bit by the weekend in St. Cloud, of all things. But beyond that, let's go back to the conversation we just had. When you are a team that, the fight is not necessarily there, or we've seen a little bit with the St. Cloud State women's team sometimes too, where we've seen it where it's been, we get scored on, you see the body language change a little bit and they're not able to regroup and that sort of thing. Is it fair to say that right now with this team is focusing on being the best team you can when it comes NCHC quarterfinal time to be able to maybe handle an upper echelon team and throw out a surprise? Or do you really think that it is all about not only the year-long process, but can you get a jump on some teams and grab some wins early? Like, do you think the focus is more where a lot of the upper tier teams are and saying, we need to take care of business early and put ourselves in a good spot, which is obviously what every team wants to do, don't get me wrong? Or is the focus more, if we can do that, that's great, but really our main goal and where we're at as a program is to show that when it comes to postseason time, which is the NCHC quarterfinals for this team for the past couple of years, that's where the money is made?
I think it's a little bit of both. And I say that I feel like I say that a lot with your questions, but let's break that down. What do I mean? So again, over the last couple of seasons, Miami has, let's just say their record hasn't been great, right? We've beat that to a dead horse. Yeah. Let's just say confidence is probably not high if you're in that locker room. A lot of anxiety. And, when you get into that spot, you start maybe overthinking the game. You maybe start doing some things that you probably would normally not do. So how do you get out of that, right? You get out of that by, you need some early confidence. Now, a lot of the teams, and part of the reason why, minus NCAA rules, which were dumb and finally got fixed, those exhibition games, right, were a way to maybe build some confidence, right? There's a big reason why Alberta and, a couple of other these Canadian colleges would come down because, you're definitely going to smoke them. But, it's a feel-good moment more than anything. It's a confidence builder. And I think Miami needs that not only in a non-conference schedule, but I do think they need some early conference. I don't know if wins necessarily. I would think it would be nice, but I think they need to feel like they can hang with some people. And I think that goes a long way. Now, in doing that, that can help jumpstart the process, right? We talk about the process because you're absolutely right. You have to almost take the same approach that St. Thomas did last year, a team that had 6 Division III athletes on them. It is what it was. But instead, Rico, a hell of a coach, by the way, hell of a human being as well, worked with them. He demanded a lot out of them. And more importantly, I think what it showed was you can take a team, get them together, play on the same page. I'm going to push you as hard as I can via Herb Brooks-esque, right? And they darn near stole a game, and maybe arguably minus, ref ball, probably could have in the CCHA. They gained a lot of respect. And dare I say it, they stole my heart a little bit toward the end of the college hockey season because they were that feel-good story. Miami can do that. But again, it takes a lot of effort. It takes commitment from both the coaching staff and the players. And dare I say, maybe a little bit of puck luck too. And I think you need a little bit of both for Miami to get out of this, I don't know if you want to call it a rut, but just to try to build some success. And this program needs it again. It's not been far removed that they were a national championship contender. This, Miami hockey franchise has had successful seasons in the past, and I would love to see it get back to that. They're just in a very tough spot, and, they need a little bit of things to go their way, but they also need a good recruiting class. We'll get to that here in a moment. They need, again, another gear from their coaching staff, and they need probably a couple pieces to fall in their lap and go and run with it.
8 seniors, 7 juniors, 9 sophomores, and 5 freshmen rounded out the crew of 29 for this team last year. On that group moving into this season, 4 of them have made departures. Ben Dexheimer is headed to Wisconsin. He was a freshman last year. Sophomore Kirk Larson to Western Michigan. And the 2 that will be in this next list here, senior Chase Gressick to Bowling Green and senior Derek Daschke, of course, to Duluth here. So what I kind of did is I picked the top forwards from last season, a couple of top defensemen, and the top goaltenders for the team. So starting with the forwards here, PJ Fletcher, who was a sophomore last season, 35 games played in all but 1 contest, 24 points for him, 4 power play goals, and only a -3 goal differential. So pretty impressive season for him. Matt Berry, who was a senior last year, he was -20, but finished with 1 less point at 23 points in all 36 games for him, and added 3 power play goals to his credit. A guy who's going to be a real bright spot, I think, coming up next this upcoming season, Matthew Barbolini, who's a sophomore, had 22 points and 6 power play goals. So think about that. They had whatever it was. I can't remember the stat. Let's see if I can find it here real quick. 29 power play goals. He had 6 of them. So think about that in terms of production, was -13 on the season. And Chase Gressick, who is like we had talked about, 21 games played for him, only was almost a point per game player with 19 tallies, 2 power play goals, and was only -2. But of course, made his departure to Bowling Green, so that's a tough loss. On the backside, I only had 2 guys that really stood out to me. Of course, Derek Daschke, the senior. Played in every single game, 28 points for him, had 1 power play goal and a -18 rating, but was just under 0.8 points per game. He's headed to Duluth. And the next defenseman on the points category was Dylan Moulton, who's a sophomore, who was last season. 10 points for him, 2 power play goals. So, and the backstop for this Redhawks team, as it always has been, Ludwig Pearson, who is entering his junior year this upcoming season. 32 games played for him, a 6.23-2 record, a 3.93 goals against, 8.94 save percentage in just over 1,860 minutes in tending the Redhawks goals. So, Nick, obviously, Gressick and Daschke, 2 guys that are really tough to lose here. We'll get to the freshmen in a second, but, Are there any guys that you saw from last year's group that, kind of jumping ahead a little bit, like Matthew Barbolino, who you think, are poised to have another good year, or maybe kind of be that breakout guy that's going to carry the play now?
Well, Barbolini for sure is at the top of my list. And, you talk about his impact on the power play. I mean, almost a quarter of their power play goals. He's fast, great set of hands, and again, a good shot. He's going to effectively have to carry the mail per se. But I want to go back to the goaltender Ludwig Pearson because, you mentioned this, was it the 3.9 so goals against, but how about the 8.94 save percentage? If you actually put those numbers together, those aren't terrible, all things considered. He was peppered with a lot of shots. In fact, dare I say that a lot of the times he was the best player on the ice. And in tough games, I still remember it was a game 1 against the Huskies at the Redhawks National Hockey Center. They left him in the entire game. And even I was a little confused as to why they never, gave him the pull. But, to Miami's credit, I don't know what you do in that situation when you're at the end of February. You probably know where you're going as far as the standings are concerned, but so why not give somebody else a shot? I don't know. And maybe this is one of those coaching type situations, or maybe it's a mental game where it's like, I need you to be able to recover from this. So to me, a lot of this starts with Pearson and net. I think he's going to have a bounce back year. Again, Barbolini up front. There's a lot of holes in the depth of this organization, but you're talking about two guys you're going to have to really lead it. To me, it's those two. I'm curious knowing if there's anybody else that you can look at this roster, at least that are returners, that you could see trying to carry some of that mail.
Yeah, certainly a lot of obviously good players here. Really, I know it's cliche, but I really do look to this freshman class, and we'll get to them in a second. The only thing that I'm trying to check on here, St. Cloud, I want to see the box score from the next night here. I wanted to see who was in net because it feels like it's been ages since I've actually gotten a chance to check out any college hockey stuff. Let's see here. I wanted to see who was in net. Ludwig Pearson again played in that 8-0 loss the following night. If I remember right, I think Kirk Larson and Logan Neaton. I'm trying to remember, was one of them hurt? I feel like their main backup was hurt. Maybe that was part of the reason too.
Yes.
I could totally be wrong. It's not the first time it's happened. Today, anyway. So as
won't be the last for you and me both,
dude. Honestly. So, but the upcoming season, I think I do point to that freshman group, and the reason I say that: 8 seniors, 9 juniors, and 4 sophomores, 9 freshmen dotting this roster of 30 players, 6 forwards and 3 defensemen rounding out, 17 total forwards, 10 defensemen, and 2 netminders on this group so far. So let's go through the 9 freshmen. And Nick, it's kind of funny. I tell you what, if you are a Dubuque Fighting Saints fan, well, you are essentially a Miami Redhawks fan at this point, because literally half of their defense core and forward core was literally going to be on this team next season. So Axel Kumlin from Stockholm, Sweden, 6'1", 195 pounds. He played in Dubuque. He's going to wear number 3, had 22 points in 58 games and a plus 24 rating on the back end. That is not too shabby. No. 2 other defensemen that are going to be joining. Michael Feenstra from Grand Haven, Michigan, 6'3", 195, big boy on the back end, playing for Dubuque as well. 5 seasons with the club, second in team history in games played, had 47 points in 190 total games, a plus 46 career rating in the USHL, and double-digit assist totals with 16 and 14 in the past 2 seasons, respectively. To round out to the defensive core, the Harrison Township, Michigan native, 6'2", 190, a plus 34 rating and 19 assists for Zane Dembski on the back end as well. Or excuse me, Dempsey, not Dembski, on the back end. So you've got all 3 of these defensemen coming from a team that's very well proven in the Dubuque Fighting Saints. Have you ever heard of Johnny Gaudreau by chance?
Never heard of him.
So let's start with those 3 defensemen. You talked about the defense. You talked about the plus minus that so eloquently is a double-edged sword for rating really poor teams, at least conference-wise, like Miami has been. Are these 3 guys that you think are going to make an impact here?
So it's funny that you mentioned it's Dubuque 2.0, right?
Yeah.
This could actually be the smartest strategy for Miami that they've had in a while.
Because they already see how their product functions.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And more importantly, their product and the guys knows each other.
Yep.
That's the big thing. So, yeah, actually.
I'm all about it.
And first of all, the size is there. Yeah. So that's good. Derek Daschke was, 6'3", 6'4", if I remember. He was a bigger defenseman. Obviously, we haven't seen these guys skate, so you're kind of wondering, I imagine, Dubuque, pretty decent squad. They probably can skate relatively good. Big thing is, how do they transition, right? I think that was one of the biggest weaknesses for Miami was their transition hockey last season. The second period was just brutal for Miami. I remember watching that series again up at the Redhawks National Hockey Center. A lot of times they were pinned down for 90 seconds, maybe 2 minutes, and at that point they're gassed and they're just flipping the puck out, just try to relieve pressure and then try to change, and just no momentum, nothing that was driving really their opponent back to their own end, besides just trying to get fresh bodies on the ice. And so they're going to be critical with this, and it's especially with the departure of Derek Daschke, who was, to me, their biggest bright spot in the back end. These three in tandem, they're going to be needed to be able to do that. If you can at least have one of them as a pairing, I would imagine that's probably part of the grand plan, per se, for Bergeron. That could be huge. Now, again, as freshmen in the NCAA ranks going from juniors, there's a curve. We saw this with Jack Peart with St. Cloud, right, where there's a lot of natural talent there, but just trying to figure out the speed, a little bit of different things, right? So I think there's a lot of promise there.
I wonder if there's a little bit less pressure playing for a team that maybe has struggled in the past couple seasons like Miami, though, and knowing that the freshman core is so big that maybe you kind of realize that, you know what, we're going to be impact players in this lineup, and it is a little bit about the process, like we talked about earlier.
Could be the opposite too, where you almost, and I'm talking about from the player's perspective, where you take it as I could be the change, and there is more pressure on me because there's maybe some pieces here we just can't maybe put them together, and maybe I can be that glue. So it depends on how you look at it, right, Noah? And you kind of hope that they take what you mentioned, which is, well, let's just go out there and play hockey, have fun. Maybe the stars fall, or maybe they take it as, I want to come in here and be Superman. And more often than not, if you have fun first, that usually bodes better.
Simple game, small biscuit, big basket, right? No one, of course, knows that better than the other. Pass, shoot, score. No one knows that better than the other Dubuque Fighting Saint, who's on the forward side, William Hallin from Gothenburg, Sweden. 21 points for him in 49 games for Dubuque this past year. Max Dukovitz coming in from Aurora, Illinois, I believe, the Langley Riverman BCHL product. 59 points for him during 51 games in the BC, 14 points in 15 playoff games, led the team in scoring. Had a very impressive run, had a cup of coffee in the USHL as well too, but we've seen it happen before where some of these BC guys actually kind of have a resurgence and really find their confidence when they kind of go back to the BC and really kind of light it up. So interested to see what he does on the front end. John Waldron, the Batavia, Illinois product. By the way, I forgot to mention William and Max, respectively, 6'1", 187 and 6'2", 182. So a couple of other big forwards coming in.
And then sense a trend here.
Yeah, no kidding. And John Waldron, how about 6'1", 185? Why not? Waterloo Blackhawks in the USHL, 60 points in 110 regular season games with Waterloo. Finished with 45 points last season and adding 3 points in 6 playoff contests as well. So a couple of good additions on the forward side. We've got a couple more to go here, and I'm going to butcher this name, and I apologize so much, Frankie. Frankie Caragiuelo, I think is how you might say it. That is definitely an Italian name, probably, if I've ever heard one. Woodbridge, Ontario native, 5'10", 173. A little bit on the smaller side, playing for Chilliwack in the BCHL. 24 points in 27 games, and also spent the year prior in the USHL with Muskegon and the Lumberjacks, tallying 4 points in 25 appearances. So, there's a guy that, maybe might be what we call quote unquote undersized, although he's really not that undersized. And he's got to be a guy that I think maybe relies a little bit on his speed.
Yami Krenala and Zach Okabe have entered the chat.
Yeah, no kidding. 2 more forwards here on the list. The Bratislava, Slovakia native Artur Turansky, who was an absolute stud in the NAL last season, playing for Lone Star, 66 points in 60 games, plus 25 rating, and was a top 10 scorer in the league. I mean, he's a fantastic addition for this club, standing at 5'11", 176. So again, you talk about a guy that maybe isn't the biggest person, still very productive, as was St. Cloud Norseman's own Blake Mesenberg, the Orono, Minnesota native, at 5'11", 183, 62 points in 59 regular season contests, and adding 6 points in 11 playoff contests. Now he's in the Central Division, so as I work for the Minot Minotauros, I got a chance to see Blake play plenty of times, and boy, he's got one heck of a release, a very smart hockey player, really good IQ, and one of those guys that's going to be a great addition to this Miami roster. So Nick, the forward side, obviously a couple of guys that are going to be good additions with the 6 forwards that are there. You're kind of seeing a little bit of trend with some size, but also some water bugs kind of buzzing around there. I mean, anything that stands out to you about these 6 players?
So a couple of things, right? A big reason why you like those water bugs, right? Not speaking because I was one or anything like that. You have some size there, right? Thank you, Caleb. But you sense like, okay, you got some size. So, maybe you have some F1s to go in there, make the initial contact, maybe win some board battles. You have a little bit more of that, maybe puck protection there than you have, again, your F2s, your F3s come and swoop in, pick up and try to, maintain possession. But again, how does this all gel? Right. So there's the ingredients are there. So if you're making a sauce from scratch, you got your garlic, you got your pepper, you got your rosemary, maybe some basil, you got some tomato sauce there. So what are we missing? Right? I don't know, not much. For those who play in the home game, not only do you not how to make a sauce from scratch, that was just randomly throwing stuff out. My mom would be terrified.
Just remember to warm up. Just remember to warm up the noodles at the same time as the sauce.
Right. Late. Anyways, for those who, that's an inside joke. So
we're not talking about anybody's significant other. Not me.
No. But there's a lot to like there. As far as that's a big recruiting class, which they desperately needed to fill some gaps per se. So I'm curious to all it comes together. I mean, you got some veteran presence there. Again, you've got, I think the most important piece, you do have a veteran in Glenn Pearson and that to kind of maybe help calm some things down. You got a very half and half freshman group versus those who aren't a freshman, maybe depending on how the roster shakes out. It's going to be a young club, and I think that for the most part. If they can at least inject some speed and maybe just, again, try to go down and maybe just hang on to the puck for a little bit. There's one thing I noticed about Miami last year, one of their biggest deficits was just no offensive zone time. A lot of time against spent their own end. So if you can at least accomplish that, you can build from that. You can start talking about cycling and maybe just some different forechecks. But you got to spend time in the offensive zone first. And so there's a lot of things to like here. Again, how's it all translate to results on the ice? We'll have to wait and see. But I think overall, I got to give the coaching staff a little bit of credit here because there's a lot of ingredients there that seem that they would mesh together. What are your quick thoughts on what we see in this pot per se of my Redhawks?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because, they're a group, like you mentioned, that they are kind of young, but they do have that veteran presence as well, too. And I was curious to take a look at the stats from last year. I mean, PJ Fletcher, like we talked about, who was the second leading scorer on the team behind Derek Daschke, highest scoring forward last year. He's going to be a junior this upcoming season. Matthew Barbolini, who's going to be a junior as well, too. Don't forget, you've got the Savage brothers, Red and Ryan Savage, which two great hockey names, as well as Joe Cassetti, who are going to be a sophomore paired with two seniors in that respect. Dylan Moulton, who is the next highest scoring defenseman, will be a junior, as long as with Hampus Rydqvist as well. So you've got a couple of guys, I think, in that sophomore junior category. And of course, don't forget your seniors, obviously at this point, well refined in the game of hockey, that I think are going to be really good impact guys here. And I think if you can get everything that you expect and then that extra gear from those returning guys, and then maybe the freshman group surprises you, this Miami team could very well give us a surprise. I think when you have a big freshman class like this, you have a lot of unknowns. I want to throw a comparable out there. Granted, they ended up winning a national championship, but we talked about it last year. Denver's incoming class and their freshman group turned sophomore was going to be pivotal, that underclassmen group for that team. I got to say, I think it panned out well for them in the end. Yes. So I think that's kind of, obviously we don't, at this point, I don't expect the Redhawks to maybe run away with things. But I think as we have them sitting at 8th place right now, it's very, very fair to say that they could definitely be a lot higher than that, depending on how their freshmen perform this season and how their returners obviously are able to continue and grow on the success that they've had, albeit maybe somewhat limited just because of the way that Miami has fared record-wise in recent times. As far as their schedule coming up, the last point that we're going to hit on before some fan things here, they do open the season October 1st and 2nd against Ferris State, followed by a road trip to both UMass Lowell and Canisius. First conference play, they'll host Denver at home, and then moving into moving into November, they head to Western Michigan, host Colorado College, and then head to North Dakota. And then they host both Michigan State and then St. Cloud in the early part of December to end the first half of their season. Second half of their schedule kicks off with a matchup at the end of December against Niagara, a couple games at home there. And then kind of a brutal non-conference schedule to start off the second half. They travel to both Denver and Omaha in January before hosting North Dakota at home, then traveling to St. Cloud, hosting Omaha again, heading to Duluth, and then finishing with Western Michigan before the quarterfinal action on March 11th and 12th. So, it's kind of interesting to see where this team is going to end up. But before we get to our listener question, and we'll try to do this for every team, Nick. Maybe we'll do the listener question first, and then we'll do the final culmination here. The listener question, of course, is from Caleb Peabody. He wants to know, why Alex and Micheletti have not bought him dinner. I still don't have an answer for you, Caleb. I don't. I mean, it's on you, Nick. I'm just saying.
Yeah, I mean, I'm the most deflective.
Here's the thing. If I'm Caleb and I'm sitting here listening to you talk about all your sauces and spices that you're getting ready to put on your pasta, I'm livid right now, but nonetheless, speaking of the right ingredients and the right mix, his actual question is, will Miami improve from a record standpoint this season? For a reminder, for a refresher, 7-27-2 overall, 4-19-1 in conference play. Will they get better than 4 wins in conference play and more than 7 wins overall this season?
I think they do. And again, you talk about how they're the toughest team to predict because of how much or how many new faces they have. But they also have the highest ceiling, right? Out of all the teams, because like you said, we just don't know, but there's a lot to like about this squad. It just all matters. Does it come together and gel into something beautiful as an on ice product? And I do think there's a lot of good mix there. And the schedule is going to be tough, especially early on, right? But I think, again, we talked about this earlier. If there was an opportunity to maybe get some early confidence, you take a split early on in that Denver series. Okay, defending national champions. Yeah, we took a split with them. Why not? You get some maybe non-conference wins under your belt.
Yeah,
I mean, why not? And yeah, I mean, to put it in Miami's, sort of give them a little bit of a knock too. They have the toughest travel out of everybody in the NCHC as far as distance traveled, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. So that doesn't help things for them either. But again, a lot of new faces. They haven't maybe done it, so maybe the unknown helps them a little bit. So we'll see. I do think they improve. I'm not sure if it's going to be marketable. I'm not sure we'll be judging Miami, though, by its record. I think we'll be judging them by how they look at the end of the season, as we've discussed before, because I think I would still give them a better grade, despite, let's just say the record's the same, but we can see a different way that they're playing the game and executing things. Maybe they just didn't get a couple bounces, right? Because hockey, sometimes the puck just doesn't go your way some nights.
And I think it kind of goes to your point, and I think that maybe that's where the stats come back in handy, where it's like, if you have a winning percentage of maybe, 300 or something like that, but your goal differential is only like -22, and your shot differential is -80, well, then that you've been in hockey games and you just, you couldn't find that extra goal, or you just couldn't find that extra bounce versus getting your doors blown off potentially. Obviously, the St. Cloud weekend certainly puts a skew into a lot of things from last season for this Redhawks club, but they fundamentally were a flawed hockey team when it comes to NCHC action. Hopefully they can improve on that next season. Our final wrap up that we're going to do for every one of these here, Nick, if you're the Miami Redhawks, what is the goal next season? And if you're St. Cloud State, how do you stop them, meaning the Redhawks, from getting a victory against the Huskies?
I think if you're Miami, you just have to believe. Honestly, it sounds cliche, but again, there's so many new faces. You have, yes, a similar coaching staff, but to believe means you're committing to what the coaching staff is trying to put on the ice. Whether that is just hit everything that moves, whether that is get me at least 20 shots on net a game. You have to commit. You have to believe. And if you do that with that many new faces, you got yourself a chance. Now, will they accomplish that? Hard to say. How does St. Cloud stop that? Well, again, kind of similar situation. Go out there and don't, respect your opponent. Again, with Miami, the numbers are brutal. I mean, it's one of those times where it's not like you're disrespecting the opponent, because again, I'm not a fan that says the mercy rule. There's a contest there, and yes, maybe the score is ugly per se from a fan's perspective, but it ain't over till it's over, right? So keep doing the things that you're doing for St. Cloud. You are the more talented team. You are the more deep team. You have all the tools to be a very good competitive team, not only in the conference, but also in the country in terms of pair-wise rankings. So don't give them an edge. Continue to be your identity, being the skill speed team that you are, and don't fall into what Miami may want to do. That is sometimes maybe beat yourself up, fall into the trap, maybe get lazy, maybe get a little bit complacent per se. That's how you just don't let yourself get beat, and you take a game to Miami.
Yeah, I think if you're St. Cloud facing this Redhawks team with a lot of unknowns that we're going to get the answer to as we obviously move farther and farther into the season, I think number one, you have to do what you did last year and kind of be an unrelenting force. You kind of have to keep your foot on the gas pedal. It feels like, especially when you're at home, and facing this Redhawks club, which I believe, if I'm not mistaken, St. Cloud, has them February 17th and 18th at home. Use that big ice sheet and, really widen the rink and really use your speed and skill to kind of get them out of position. When you get a team like that running around, I think that becomes part of an issue to try to continue to try to contain that. If I'm the Redhawks, though, next season, my number one goal, it's a simple one, Nick, finish 6th or higher in the NCHC. I think that's a good benchmark to set compared to past couple of seasons and a new incoming group. You talked about that belief. You have an end goal in mind. You want to finish 6th or higher. And then if you can accomplish that goal, then the next season, maybe you're shooting for home ice, right? So, I think it's those building blocks that Chris Bergeron has to put his stamp on this team and the coaching staff, as they bring this new group in. It should be an exciting time. And as always, we wish the Miami Redhawks the best of luck in all NCHC action, except, of course, when it's against our St. Cloud State Huskies. That will do it for the main portion of the show. We're going to head on to the Extra Ice session where we're going to talk all things Chicago Blackhawks. And welcome into the Extra Ice session. Noah Grant, that's me, with Nick Maxon, who's on the left of your screen. Yeah, wearing a...
I feel like that went blank. You set me up for that.
Yeah, well, I don't know. Did you expect any less from me? I mean, come on.
That's fair.
I mean, here's the thing. If you're listening in the car, maybe we sound the same. I have no idea. Just kidding. I listened back to every one of our episodes, and we do not sound the same. You sound a lot more articulate than I do. But someone who has articulated things very actively here,
and clearly,
in a very well-worded set of paragraphs that essentially the shorthand is trade request. Jonathan Toews essentially stating the Blackhawks' 5-year plan doesn't sound appealing to me at all. On top of that, like you mentioned with the Dallas Stars, Patrick Kane is actively-ish being shopped around the National Hockey League right now. I think the thought is that both players who are in the final year of a $10 million average annual value deal would have to have 50% salary retained for a team to probably even take a chance on that. Patrick Kane's going to command a return. I think Jonathan Toews maybe a little less, probably a middle six centerman, third line centerman on a potential Stanley Cup contending team. But nonetheless, Nick, this Chicago Blackhawks club, who's been in the news for a variety of things, notwithstanding being the 6th lowest paying team, they have a projected amount in cap space of just under $10.6 million, barely getting to the cap floor at this particular point.
You must be envious of Arizona.
Yeah, I'm not really sure. They've got 4 UFAs coming up next season. 1 RFA currently right now, as well as Caleb Jones, who's a current RFA yet to be signed, and then 1 UFA next year on the goaltending side, which is Alex Stalock. All the rest of their defensemen are locked up to this point. Nick, before we get into their depth chart, let's just ask the straight up question. 1, do Jonathan Toews and or Patrick Kane get traded at some point this season? And number 2, if you think so, does it happen before the regular season even opens?
No, I don't. Because at the end of the day, the way that NHL GMs approach the offseason is there's the big free agents, right? The ones that are actually available. You're looking at, you have a amount of cap space that you're looking at. Again, and I think at the end of the day, these two players are high profile players. That's what throws a wrench into this a little bit, is that they're going to have a say no matter where they're going. And I think that's where, and I'm not sure, again, there's been conflicting reports. I think Mark Lazarus of The Athletic had tweeted something that Kane had not been being shopped around. Now, mind you, there could be some truth to both sides, right? Where maybe they weren't shopping him, but maybe teams were calling, and maybe Dallas is the one that called. So same conversation, who initiates, maybe the opposite, right? But
yeah,
no, they're not being traded before the deadline. Not a lot of teams that either of those guys would probably want to go to, AKA a playoff/cup contender, don't have the space for them right now. And I just don't think right now they had bigger fish to fry, meaning Chicago, meaning to actively roll the tanks. So they trade Alex DeBrincat, as I had mentioned, was a double-edged sword, where it's, if you're going to trade him, you do it now because you get the best value on it, even though they got absolute dirt for him. I think that was a terrible trade by the GM of the Blackhawks. But you signaled it. They threw up the white smoke. We're going to be changing the guard here. And you can see with Taves' comments that he sees it. It sounds like Kyle Davidson has been very upfront about the direction of the club, AKA we want Connor Bedard, I guess. So we'll see. I don't see them being traded before the season. If anything, they are a trade at deadline acquisition. Because if I'm the player too, let's think of it this way. Let's throw this on the player, who I think has the final control. I'm not sure if any of these guys have either no move clauses or limited no trade clauses. Even if they don't, I still think they've earned the respect of the organization, winning 3 Stanley Cups with them, that they probably have at least a little bit of say in where they're going. And I think if I'm the players, I want to wait till at least the trade deadline to see who's in it, who's out of it. Does any team have a hole? Do I want to go with this team or that team? So I if anything, they would be traded at the earliest trade deadline. Now, again, for Chicago's PR, for Chicago's brand's sake, it's also possible to finish off the season too without moving. I doubt that. And they go to free agency. But we'll put it to you this way: are they Chicago Blackhawks at this time next a year from now, 12 months? I'm starting to very much doubt that.
So, as you mentioned, Patrick Kane and Jonathan Taves, both full no-move clauses, as well as Seth Jones. As far as modified no-trade clauses, Tyler Johnson, who has 2 years left on his deal, has a 20-team trade list.
Jake McCabe signed by Chicago. I think we need to make that clear. That was the Tampa contract, I believe, before he was traded.
Yeah, Jake McCabe, defenseman, 7-team no-trade list, and Peter Mrazek, 10-team no-trade list. And a 10-team no-trade list for Connor Murphy as well, who's on injured reserve. Now, Nick, I want you to do an exercise for me. And no, I'm not going to make you do the splits because we don't want to see that pain on TV.
Neither do I.
But here's what I want you to do. This depth chart is off of Cap Friendly, but it related updates are coming from Cap Friendly _ depth charts. Is where this is coming from. So I'm going to read 18 skaters, 2 goaltenders, and 3 healthy scratches they have listed on Cap Friendly. I want you to count how many of the names you legitimately know on this team. Okay.
Sure. Yep.
So, and there will be quite a few. Don't get me wrong. This is the National Hockey League, but we'll start and listed in the order. I'm going to go left wing, center, right wing through the 12 forwards, and then the 3 D pairings, 2 goaltenders. Okay.
Yep.
Lucas Reichel, Jonathan Taves,
Yep.
Patrick Kane.
Yep.
That's first line. Andreas Athanasiou, Max Domi, Tyler Johnson.
Yep.
Sam Lafferty,
Yes.
Jujar Chiara, Colin
Yep.
Blackwell,
Yep.
Philip Kurashev,
Yep.
Mackenzie Entwistle, Taylor
Yes.
Radish,
Yes.
Alex Vlasic, Seth Jones, Jake McCabe,
Yep.
Connor Murphy,
Yep.
Riley Stillman, Caleb Jones,
Yes.
Peter Mrazek, Alex Stalock,
Yep.
Boris Kachuk, Reese Johnson, Alec Regula.
Yes. Kind of.
I mean, there's some names that I think we've heard around, but that is not a sexy depth chart, man.
Well, let's go through this, right? So Lucas Reichel, a younger kid. Obviously, we don't need to go with Kanan Taves, but Andreas Athanasiou, former Detroit Red Wing. He's bounced around a little bit. Incredibly fast skater.
Yes.
But just maybe not a complete hockey player. Max Domi, we all know him as he's bounced around a little bit. Tyler Johnson, again, between Tampa and some other teams. Sam Lafferty, I believe was once a Buffalo Sabre, if I recall. Jujhar Khaira, yes, Jujhar Khaira.
Former Oiler, yeah.
Oiler, Colin Blackwell. He's been around the league, I think, a little bit. Yes. Philip Kurashev, again, one of the Chicago draftees. Mackenzie Entwistle was still a younger player, but I believe was acquired via trade. Taylor Radish, same thing of old. I think he was a big impact player for Team Canada for World Juniors a couple of years ago.
Yep.
Alex Vlasic, not a household name, but still young as Seth Jones. We all know former Blue Jacket Jake McCabe, former Buffalo Sabre Connor Murphy. Also, I believe a former Columbus Blue Jacket Riley Stillman. Why does that name sound familiar? Wasn't he former NCHC material?
That's a great question. Riley Stillman, drafted in the 4th round by Florida. And to answer your Sam Lafferty question, he was drafted in 2014 in the same round by the Pittsburgh Penguins.
Okay.
Riley
and then
Stillman.
Yeah, Caleb Jones. I might be thinking of Corey Stillman.
That's what I was thinking of too. Let's see.
Yeah. So then Caleb Jones again. Middle of the pack kind of guy. We all know about Peter Mrazek. He's bounced around. Alex Stalock. Minnesota Wild fans know him. The scratches, Boris Kachuk, Reese Johnson, and Alec Regula. Not household names either. So I believe those are younger players as well. But besides the sexy part, Noah, this is not at all the depth of talent that we saw in 2015, the last Chicago Stanley Cup victory. Where you had guys like Duncan Keith, you had guys like Brent Seabrook, many of the back end, Nicholas Hjalmarsson, again up front. I believe, was Hossa on the team still? I think he was.
And it's interesting because, like you talked about, the cap hit with you have $10.6 million in cap space. You have 19 on your current roster, 41 out of your 50 contracts that you can have. So you're going to be adding another body or two to the NHL roster, obviously.
Via training camp trials, basically.
Yeah, and you're trying to potentially, at some point, have Jonathan Taves and Patrick Kane not a part of the fold anymore. The question is, Chicago, if they're in a full-scale rebuild, what do you do with that cap space? Why are they not spending towards the cap? Are they waiting for something in the future? Why are they not going after some of these bigger fish that were on the free agency? Would Nazem Kadri not look good in a Chicago Blackhawks uniform, for example?
I think the question is backwards. Why would Nazem Kadri, after winning the Stanley Cup, go to the Chicago Blackhawks? So I didn't mean to tear down your question, but I believe that's more of, the money is there, though. There's no question about it. If Nazem Kadri wanted to be in the Windy City, if he wanted to play hockey and didn't really care about the winning percentage and, wanted to be a veteran guy and just get a paycheck, probably not the worst place to go. But it sounds like for Kadri, again, it appears also Colorado, just on a side tangent, is potentially trying to get like a 3-team trade together to try to make some space for him. So because I guess for me, if Kadri was all about the money, I think we've already been seen a signing yet. So I think he is waiting to see if Colorado can pull something for him, because I think he does want to return. So you have two facets, right? When a team has not trade space, that doesn't work, cap space. Question is, what do they do with it? But again, with Chicago trading Alex DeBrincat, which was what we thought was going to be their sort of leader, their centerpiece for their next generation of talent, and you trade that out, that's a pretty strong message to not only younger players, but I think also the rest of the league too, of where this franchise is going. And for Kadri and for any other big prize free agents, I mean, why go there? Because again, it's just, I don't know, it's not attractive right now. And so I think your best bet, and maybe they look to the Toronto Maple Leafs, and maybe it's the Kyle Dubas mathematics is, well, if you're banking to get Connor Bedard, you're going to eventually have to pay him. So we need to save our money now. Maybe that's what it is. I don't know. But I think you have a 2-part answer to a 2-part question.
Well, let's talk about more two-part questions, and these are my final two ones here. Just kind of a short little extra ice session here, just an interesting topic that I thought would be kind of fun. Of course, don't forget, speaking of Connor Bedard and some other really good players, we do have the World Juniors coming up in August that we get to talk about too, so that'll be exciting and a little bit of extra fun. We'll have some extra content to be talking about, obviously. And I think all the eyes in the hockey world are going to be on that one. But my first part of this question is, for each player respectively, Patrick Kane, Jonathan Toews, what would you say the percentage is on either side that they either re-sign with the Chicago Blackhawks in some way, shape, or form, or are gone from the Chicago Blackhawks in some way, shape, or form? What would you say for either of them?
So I said this with DeBrincat when it was black and white. I'm going to say for both, 0% chance they're re-signed and 100% they're gone.
Okay, so part number question of that discussion is, what are the top destinations to land each player in your opinion?
Ooh, good question. So I think there is something to be said about Patrick Kane to the Buffalo Sabres.
Yeah.
I do think there's something there.
But the Rangers, though, Nick.
The Rangers, I mean, you got to give the Rangers credit. They've been creative at getting some talent there. The problem is that they would also have to give up a haul. And you kind of wonder with Chicago, too. And here's where the disadvantage of Chicago, right, is that everybody knows what they're trying to do. So now your leverage is a lot less. And I think if Chicago, you're not looking for immediate help necessarily. You're probably looking for picks. Now, mind you, they have 2 first-round picks this year, 2 first-round picks next year, both from the Tampa Bay Lightning, who happen to be, I believe, their 2015 Cup final contender, if I recall.
Yeah.
Irony, right? But at the end of the day, their hands kind of shown. So you kind of wonder what teams have the space, where these players would like to go.
How terrifying would it be to see Patrick Kane and Artemi Panarin on the New York Rangers and back together again? Like, that's just
that would be nuts.
To me, that's a terrifying combination. And in fact, speaking of the New York Rangers, so I'm going to assume are probably, let's see where they're at here.
$1 million in cap space.
Yeah, and I want to see.
Let's just say you retain 50% of that, so you still need about $6 million to come back the other way. Does that mean Chris Kreider goes? No. Vinny Trocheck, they just acquired him via trade. So that means you got younger guys like Philip Hedl.
Yeah, where I was curious about, and it wasn't so much this year. I was curious about where they were at next season, because again, the thing to remember is Patrick Kane may be a deadline acquisition for a team he doesn't stay with too, and then the Rangers circle back and become part of something as well too. So it's interesting to see where he might end up. The Dallas Stars, now they have a little bit of that cap space, like we talked about, to potentially make a move. And I wouldn't be shocked to see them try to make a move. But again, Patrick Kane also has to waive his no movement clause as well too. I don't know if that's more or less challenging for him. Jonathan Toews is a more interesting story. Same amount of cap hit, but not as much value. But definitely, I feel like has made it more vocal that he wants out the number 88. So, is there anybody that you think makes sense? A team that probably needs a middle 6 or top line, bottom 6 center, if that makes sense, a third line guy.
Dare I say the Minnesota Wild? Dare I say it?
Yeah.
Now,
find me the cap space and find me Bill Guerin's head on a platter when that one doesn't work out.
Hear me this. How insane would Toews, Zuccarello, and Kaprizov be?
Yeah.
That's almost salivating.
Yeah.
Now, I should stop there because it's not going to happen.
But Evgeny Malkin, though, Nick.
I know, Evgeny Malkin, right. But think about it this way, though. That could work. And when I say it could work, what I'm talking about is for the Minnesota Wild. Again, you have...
Yeah, one of those defenseman contracts would be going.
Yes, one of the defenseman contracts, you could, dare I say, Matt Dumba? Dare I say it? Could you throw in Dmitry Kulikov as a sweetener? I don't know. Probably not, but
Would you even need to do both? Because that's the thing, and I know you have to keep some cap space for the moves, but when you get to a point where you're at the trade deadline, the salary is not the same cap hit as what you have, and then when you're retaining 50% of that salary on top of that, it becomes somewhat manageable.
You could do a first round pick plus Matt Dumba for Jonathan Toews. I think that would work, honestly. And yes, Minnesota Wild fans, you heard it here first.
Would you do it though? Do you think he's worth that much to the Minnesota Wild?
I think it has more to do with what Jonathan Toews may see in the squad. Now, again, a lot of this is barring, how the Minnesota Wild are successful. And mind you, maybe the biggest news we didn't touch on, Noah Grande's Kaprizov, according to reports, is safely back in the United States. And so this, anxious period for fans in the upper management could be at rest. So thank goodness for that, right? Yeah. So, but I do think, let's look at the Bailey, just to go on a small tangent. Look what Bailey Guerin did. Made the trade with Fiala with a Western Conference team with Kevin Fiala. Chicago is in a very deep rebuild, meaning you could trade Toews to the Wild. You're not in contention with them. So you're looking for maybe picks. You're looking for maybe something else. Matt Dumba on 1 year left. I mean, it's not like I don't like Matt Dumba, but if he's the sacrificial lamb here to get Toews, I'd pull the trigger.
So for those who have been wondering about Jonathan Toews' production since the little COVID piece and some of the injuries he's had, of course, missing 2020, 2021, essentially. But before that, the past three seasons, 2018-19 had 81 points in 82 games, 2019-20, 60 points in 70 games played. And then last season, after returning 37 points in 71 games on a very poor Chicago squad. So definitely, I think it would be a watch and see and wait type thing to see what kind of season he obviously has. The thing that's also crazy is if you're making the case for Jonathan Toews, in theory, Nick, you can also make the case for Patrick Kane.
You absolutely could, because the numbers would be the same coming back, right? Yeah. But I do think down the middle is where it's needed most. Yeah. And I'm not sure, because when you have Zuccarello and Kaprizov in their chemistry, I'm not sure you need much more for Toews other than the fact that, is he healthy? Yeah. Is he skating well? And that's been the biggest thing. And that same Mark Lazarus piece, again, who does a great job covering the Blackhawks for The Athletic. I think one of the things that has not been talked about was Toews and how he feels so much better, and how he seems to be physically more ready for this season. He's ready to have a little bit more compete in his game. You could tell that whether it's from COVID and, again, the injuries too in the past couple of years really stalled him a little bit. And if I'm GM Bill Guerin, I'm not necessarily watching his point total, because I think you could honestly stick almost any center. I mean, those two made Victor Rask look good. Yeah. I mean, and it's not a knack on Victor Rask. It just means that they just know how to make it work. You throw a more dynamic Jonathan Toews in the middle there, that's dangerous.
Yeah. Right? There's a couple teams that I think makes it work, and this is my final point for the night. Of course, obviously the Coyotes, Sabres, Anaheim Ducks, Dallas Stars, Islanders all have the cap space as well. Calgary Flames and the Devils do a little bit. There's one team on this list that I could see a certain general manager pulling off something very well in this regard. Detroit Red Wings have $10.3 million in cap space, Nick. And I feel like that's a destination that, I know we're talking about rebuilds and that sort of thing, but they just seem like a team that would be able to maybe pry one of those guys away, just with the plan that Steve Yzerman has created. The other team on that list, like I mentioned right above them, is the Calgary Flames. If Jonathan Huberdeau and Mackenzie Weegar both decide to stay, but you want a rental to chase maybe a Stanley Cup, if both of those guys are playing well, maybe one of those guys could be a great option too. But those are kind of the couple teams that I'm throwing out there, Nick, just because they do have the ample cap space. Do you have any parting thoughts about the Chicago Blackhawks, Patty Kane, Johnny Toews? The Hawks are just –
they're not going to those places. I'll tell you that much.
Yeah, a 5-year rebuild sounds about right here.
It does. I mean, again, they signaled that. We've talked about that ad nauseum the last couple of times we've made them a topic, but I can't see – again – it's a two-way street when you talk about these openings, right? Does Detroit, is that a approachable thing? And I think at this point in their careers, I don't think they're looking for a playoff contender. I think they're looking for a Stanley Cup contender, which makes that list even more difficult because, again, of the salary cap constraints, aka mostly with the COVID repercussions and just the fact that the NHL has a hard salary cap. Now, that's where I think the Wild actually have a decent shot at it, because you're not having to part with a lot of money, meaning you don't need to throw out 3-4 players to get a rental in Taves. I think that you do have a deep enough roster where it's attractive to either one of those two players that that they can help you make a run. Marc-Andre Fleury maybe has a part in that too. Again, that's probably the biggest question mark going forward, but hard to say. Again, I think for Chicago, you're not seeing the East versus West. I think everybody's open for business with them, and ultimately those two players are going to make the decision on where they go. Again, if they have that in their contracts with the full new move clause, but I don't know. We'll have to wait and see, because as we know, I mean, we thought the Islanders were going to be back to playoff form, and they missed the playoffs. So at the end of the day, the NHL was crazy like that. We love it for that reason. So we'll have to wait and see. But again, I think the biggest part is what's and I think maybe this is the question. Maybe this is my final thought. Noah, is when those two are gone, because it's going to happen, and it's going to happen either at the trade deadline or via free agency next July 1 when we get back to normal scheduling. What now becomes, or who I should say, becomes the face of the Chicago Blackhawks? And do they win the lottery to get Connor Bedard? Let's say they don't. Now what? Again, that's part of that 5-year rebuild that you're talking about, where this is a deep restructuring in the player department.
Yeah, right now it might be Seth Jones, or maybe the 7th overall pick that they just picked, depending on how he pans out, or like you mentioned, the following draft class. But I know one thing: if Patrick Kane ever ended up on the Minnesota Wild, we'd have no worries about how to play a puck off a stanchion ever again. Just ask Ilya Bryzgalov. I had to throw that one in there, of course. But Nick, I'm not really sure what to do. But what I do know is that coming up after this week, we should be back to some relatively normal scheduling for the most part, as far as I know, for the next couple of weeks. So hopefully we can get that remedied out. We'll have to see. As far as I foresee, and as far as Nick and I have talked, it seems like we're going to be back to normal from what we can see. More news, obviously, upcoming. And we'll keep you in the dark a little bit about who the next team in the NCHC preview is going to be. So for Nick Maxon, I am Noah Grant, and we will see you soon in the den.
Your one-timer coming, they score! Ripped in! A bomb from Pervix!
So Dana Rasmussen fires and she scores! Dana Rasmussen for the Huskies
Dwayne Kaprizov in for a chance to win it! He scores! Kirill the Thrill is for real! Welcome to the NHL!
Cathedral is now 42.6 seconds away from wrapping up the school's first ever title.